out to our Eventbrite attendees. So thank you for coming. And once again, if you can chat with each other in the chat function. If you have any questions for the panelists, please put them in the Q&A and we'll get to them later in the program. I also want to mention that Glasgow 2024 Presents does have a code of conduct that I'd just like to remind you of. We do have a zero tolerance policy on racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, and any other negative thing that you can think of that pops into your head. Just be polite to your fellow webinar attendees and YouTube commenters, and please just be civil and polite with each other. Thank you very much. So we do want to warn you that anyone behaving inappropriately will be removed. So
cast into the void.
Yeah, exactly.
You will be
you can hang out with Margaret. Anybody who is watching us on YouTube, welcome. And you please put your comments and questions in the chat function of YouTube, and they will get passed on to us here on the panel. So, and if anybody is live tweeting this program, thank you very much. Please make sure that you use the hashtag Glasgow 2024 as part of your tweets. So I'd like to get us started and go around the circle here and introduce our panelists. So Kirsten, I'm going to start with you. So please introduce yourself and let's go forth.
Hi, I'm Kirsten. I'm known as Green Dragon at theonering.net. I've been a staffer there for a while. I wasn't one of the first stage staffers. I bow to the first stage staffers. It was about 2007, 2008 that I came on board as a staffer. I was lurking in message boards and posting in message boards from very early on. I now have the lofty title of Director of Partnerships with the One Ring, which basically just means I liaise with folks who want us to get involved with things like this. I've been a Tolkien lover since I was a little kid, and my dad was reading The Hobbit to my older brothers and said, "Oh, you won't want to hear this, you're too young for it," but I insisted on sitting in and listening, and the rest is history. In my real life work, I'm a stage director and a singer, and I'm delighted. Oh, and I live in Glasgow, so I'm thrilled that Worldcon is in Glasgow next year. Thanks for having me here today.
All right. Jim, let's go to you.
Okay, yeah, I'm Jim Wert. In the onering.net, I'm Mad-Eye Gamgee. If Kirsten is a second ager, I'm probably a third or fourth ager as far as addition to the One Ring staff. In particular, I'm kind of, along with a couple others, holding up the East Coast of the One Ring contingent, especially when we do our activities at Dragon Con, where our version of the ground rules that you laid out were just don't be a jerk. And that's the sort of the Dragon Con motto. I have been a Tolkien fan since my second grade teacher introduced me to The Hobbit. And when I read that, because she wouldn't read it to me, so she forced me to read it, and have been a Tolkien lover ever since. Have married an equal Tolkien passionate enthusiast. We wrote love notes to one another in Tengwar, and so deeply invested for many, many years in all things Tolkien. Even before the Rankin Bass movies came out, which candidly were deeply, or the Bakshi movies too, were disappointing to me because they just didn't go far enough deep. So here we go.
Okay, I'm going counterclockwise on my screen. So Tukish, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. So my name's John, and I go by Tukish at the One Ring. I fell in with the One Ring in the early days, so you could call me a first ager, but we won't have any bowing, none of that. So I was basically, came in to look around for Lord of the Rings movie news when I heard about it in December of, I guess it was 98. And there wasn't much out there yet, but a little while later found Torn. And I'll never forget, Mike Orzon had posted about Gollum. and he had this picture he shouldn't have had, well, an image of a drawing. And it caused quite a ruckus. And at that time, it was very upsetting for industry folks. So he took it down, and I was like, ooh, what's going on here? So I was really interested and found the chat room there, and was greeted by Balin and Jincy, and some people who were already established regulars, even though the chat room was really very, very new. And back in those days, I mean, how many people were chatting online? It's just 1999. So pretty crazy. And in my own life, I discovered Lord of the Rings through The Hobbit, and we were just talking about Rankin Bass. For me, that was my first exposure. Watching TV, you know, one Sunday night, and this cartoon comes on, and what? Unbelievable. So it was life-changing for me. And what clinched it was a little while later, my 5th grade teacher had the film strip, and I was a pretty squirrely kid, and he was going to show us the film strip. I don't know if any of you remember the ones that would advance. You'd have a cassette player with it, and it would be a frame by frame, and there'd be a beep after each, you know, image was sort of played out. Then you'd advance it. So teacher said, Mr. Howard, has anybody seen this? I was like, oh yeah, me. So he put me on charge of the film projector there. And not only did that lead to a lifetime of Tolkien, but also, you know, that must have tapped the inner educator in me, because I became a school teacher and a principal. I read The Hobbit every year to my kids for 10 years. And it's just been a joy to share it with generation after generation. Was real involved in the website. Fast forward to today, we just did a big Comic-Con last summer, and got to participate there. That's where we met Willie. And, you know, things continue to really be amazing at Torn. And it's been such a privilege to be part of that community, and a joy to be here today.
Okay, Willie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey, hello everyone. How you doing? My name is Willie, better known as New Better Do Better. I am a Lord of the Rings content creator and a bit of a lore expert. I'm really appreciative, and I just want to say thank you so much to everyone at Torn for inviting me to be on this panel with them, and all the lovely things I've been able to do with them, being at Comic-Con, a couple of Comic-Cons now. And I wanted to thank Kirsten and everyone who's involved in Torn for allowing me to express my opinions and my thoughts and my love for Tolkien with you guys. It's really an honor. I got into Tolkien when I was a young lad, getting in trouble in school, and I started reading Tolkien in the library, and I fell in love with it, and I've been hooked ever since. I am someone who likes to deep dive, and I think what sets me apart from other Tolkien creators is I'm a bit of you know, in both worlds, where I'm outside, as we say. I'm outside, but I'm also a bit of a nerd too. So I have both of those things going. So people have told me I can break down Tolkien in a way that is understandable. And since everybody's saying it, I'm going to take that as my claim to fame. And I'm going to say, you know, that's what I'm most known for: making funny videos, making versus videos, and you know, now I'm able to do all these wonderful things, meet all these wonderful people, and get all these wonderful opportunities. So I'm really appreciative, and I'm just going to keep on studying and sharing my information that I have and my thoughts on Tolkien forever, and that's why we're here to talk about that. So thank you so much again.
Sorry, I forgot I was muted. Dave, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Oh yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I'm David Green, so I am not a part of the One Ring or a content creator for Tolkien. I am a fantasy author. I write epic fantasy and urban fantasy, but Tolkien is like a huge inspiration, and you know, something that I kind of not aspire to, but it's something that I've always kind of like wanted to get into fantasy since I was a young child. Funnily enough, like Tokish, I remember back in the days of the beginning of the internet, and our one friend when we were in secondary school had the internet, and this was around 1999, and we'd all gather around each month when the new Empire magazine was out, and I still have the copy of when the Lord of the Rings movies were announced. And it was very exciting. I'd read the books by then. And our one friend had the internet. That was it. And we'd go around this house on a Saturday, and we would scour the internet for anything we could find about the Lord of the Rings movies. And we found the One Ring Net back in 1999. And so I've been visiting the website since then, a very long time now. But yeah,
Wow.
so the One Ring has been a big part of the last 20 years of my life, over 20 years of my life, I guess. Especially when those times when the movies were coming out, and then the whole messy situation in between the original trilogy and the Hobbit and everything like that. In terms of getting into Tolkien, I have the first copy of The Hobbit that I had when I was 7. My mum bought it for my older brother, who wasn't interested, which is, that's just sums up my older brother. I guess he won't be watching. And I know it's the first copy because as you do when you're a child, I claimed it as mine. So I wrote my name, my age, my address, right down to the galaxy that we're in, because that's what you used to do when you were a child.
That's one does.
It's quite battered. It's a battered old book, but I still have it. I'm going to read it to my son, who is 5, very, very soon, because he's aware of Tolkien now. And I was a year ago. I was diagnosed with autism, and one of the reasons that it was very, very early on in my diagnosis that was not a surprise to anyone was when my assessor asked me, what am I special in? What do I really like? And an hour later, after talking about Tolkien for about an hour, she was like, I think we have discovered one of your special interests. So there we are. So I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome.
I think there's a fascinating potential study in there for correlates between people on the spectrum and Tolkien fandom,
Sure,
honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, I think
So
so.
that's why people keep coming back.
Obsession.
That's the answer. It's our 42. So
Mental.
That works for me.
I love that segue right there.
yeah. Well, I'm AM Justice. I go by Amanda, but I am also a lifelong Tolkien fan, although I discovered it a little bit later than you guys, because I think I was in 6th grade and I was home recuperating from a childhood surgery, and my mother brought the Lord of the Rings home, brought the Fellowship of the Ring home from the library for me. I can't even remember if it was at my request or just something she found. And that was the first book that I read. I read The Hobbit after reading the trilogy. So much the way that Jackson did the movies. But anyway, been a lifelong fan ever since. And probably the Silmarillion's actually my favorite of the major works. That's the one that I reread probably at least once a year. So I love the deep lore. I love the first and second age. That's kind of my jam. So anyway, I am thrilled to get this thing started, and let's answer that question. Really, why do we keep returning to Middle Earth? So I think that I have my own theories, but I want to hear from you guys. So somebody want to jump in, or do I need to call on someone?
I'd love to jump in and just lay 3 big ideas, and then we can dive in. But I think one is beauty. And that involves not only natural landscapes, but characters and events and so on. 2 is, I would call it relevance. That is, there are so many themes that people can apply to things that they care deeply about. And 3 is resonance on deeply human themes. And I can flesh out what some of those are. But for me, those 3 things, beauty, relevance, and human themes, are all wrapped up deeply in why we keep coming back. Reading it through in the COVID times and saying, wow, this is really applicable. Or reading it through, as whether it's in some sort of a conflict or some kind of a personal crisis or a broader crisis, there's something that resonates deeply about all those things for me with Tolkien.
If I may step in, I'd like to say untapped potential and I'm speaking mostly with media, there's always untapped potential. There's always something we don't get, whether it's Tom Bombadil, whether it's Glorfindel,
Yeah.
whether it's something, there's always something that when they make a different variation of it or something, we don't get something, and we know that there's so much left out there because the text is so vast and it has so much nooks and crannies that they can't possibly put all of it in. So when the next media is announced, we're like, oh, maybe we'll get Erkenbrand, maybe we'll get Helm Hammerhand. Now we're getting Helm Hammerhand. Now we're super excited. So we're gonna keep coming back. We're gonna keep coming back, whether it's the same media that we've been presented, even if it's the same thing, we're gonna be like, well, I wonder if they'll do that this way. I wonder if they're gonna put that wolf scene, in Holland in this version of the Lord of the Rings. And then of course, we're all waiting for the Silmarillion at some point to get made. I'll probably be long dead when that happens. But just like with the Rings of Power, we was like, oh, the Second Age. We get to see the creation of the ring. We get to see the creation of the Nazgul. We get to see these untapped potential is why we keep coming back. And is one of the major reasons, beside the wonderful reasons that Jim said, but these are things that just keep us going back. And when it comes to the text, every time I reread it, and I reread the Silmarillion probably twice a month, every month. And I always find something new every time I go back. Doesn't matter how many times I've read this book. I'm like, oh, I didn't get that last time, and it's just all those themes and things they come rushing down. It's very euphoric. So untapped potential is the biggest reason why I'm coming back, and that's specifically with the media, but with the text, always finding something new, and all the themes are applicable to our lives, just like Jim said.
I like Peter's comment in the chat here, says not enough gaffer. Really, not enough gaffer, nearly enough. But I think Willie and Jim have touched on sort of an important point, that there's kind of two levels of coming back to Tolkien. There's coming back personally, as we all do every time we return to the books, and it's like a warm blanket that you wrap yourself in and it's a safe place. And then there's the coming back as sub-creators. Every time a new filmmaker approaches it, a new music writer. I mean, we featured recently on One Ring about operas that have been set in stories from the Silmarillion, and and I think that Tolkien had, we know that Tolkien had a great awareness himself of this idea of sub-creativity, his word as sub-creators, and his desire, as he expressed it himself, for people to be able to add to the tapestry, to weave their own thread into it, as it were. And so just looking at that, keep coming back as further creators, as opposed to the coming back for our own personal dwelling in Middle-earth. There's a richness and an openness that I think, because Tolkien himself loved this idea of being inspired by myth, and then adding your own bit to it, making your own pottery, painting, whatever it was inspired by it. He almost couldn't help creating works that were open to that because of his own awareness and desire for that. And so Tolkien's work seems to me to be particularly available to other creators to do their own thing and to add their own thread to his tapestry.
And it's almost an organic thing. We just heard earlier about Jim writing love notes in Tengwar, and I can remember doing exactly that. I would make, I don't know, at 11 years old, try to calligraphy Elvish, and here's my name in Elvish, and wow, it was this consuming art. And I guess I'm jumping in here. So I appreciate what each of you has said and hit on really key themes. And, one of the things that strikes me as well is Tolkien's ability to kind of span eras. He's timeless. I think part of it is his linguistic talent, his use of words and the way that he writes, because it's at once accessible, but yet there's an old worldliness to it. There's this archaic sense of it. So you're kind of getting this feeling of being immersed in this old world, but you're walking through it with a familiar friend. and it becomes this very personal experience. Willie, now I know why I can't keep up with you. Twice a month reading Silmarillion. Holy cow, there's so much meat in there. It's so dense, and so many words and names and events. So it's immersive, right? It's consuming. And so you have this very personal experience with it. And at the same time, it's a community experience because we share it together. And so I think that's a huge draw. People see people excited about this really neat, creative, available, accessible entity, and it's this body of art that spans generations and genre. We have music, we have art, we have film, we have animation, we have literature, we have painting, the fine arts. It's amazing. So it's everywhere, and I think it's at once immediately familiar to so many people in Western culture, at least, because the themes that he wrote about and even elements of plot and so forth are all over the place in storytelling. And let's face it, we've always loved to listen to stories as humans. There's something that's in our DNA about hearing and telling stories. So everybody fits somewhere in Middle Earth. And I think some of these elements have also contributed to its momentum over the years.
I think it just offers so much to so many different people. No matter what, for people that like stories, there's so many sort of hooks that can really get people to sink their teeth into. So not only is it a great stories first and foremost, with easily identifiable characters and characteristics and arcs. If you're a map person, there's amazing maps, and you can go and find out all these maps, and you can see how the maps developed over since the creation of Arda to the end of the Third Age and the start of the Fourth Age. There's genealogy, if that's your thing. There's debate over genealogy, if that is also your thing.
It's always a thing.
Yeah, I mean, and there's all this kind of stuff, and it's one of these things that kind of keeps communities thriving. It's like, what color hair does Legolas have? And that's something that everyone will keep people debating for a very long time. Does the Balrog have wings? This kind of stuff. People can talk about it, and they have been talking about it for decades, and they will continue to do so. And there's this rich mythology where there's enough answers and there's enough detail to satisfy people, but there's also enough gaps for people to fill in with their imagination, which is a wonderful thing. But I think the thing for me that keeps coming back to, and as a kind of a storyteller as well, is that there's always a lot of hope in whatever Tolkien does, and even in the most hopeless situations that he writes about. And there is some very, very especially in the kind of First Age and Second Age, and even in the Third Age, there's some very, very hopeless situations and very dark times that the characters and the world faces, especially when Erendil goes to beseech the Valar to come and help them. It's like, it's the end of the road, essentially. There's nowhere else to go. There is still that bit of hope that remains. And I think that is something that it means a lot to me as a reader, as a storyteller. And I think it's something that means a lot to people in their regular lives, that we've all been in hopeless situations, and it's that little bit of hope that you cling to. Right. And that is, I think, something that the spirit of the Jackson films really captured better than anything else, I think, in terms of adaptation of Tolkien's work. And it's something that I think brings people back, because as Kirsten said, it is like a warm blanket. But no matter how dark and how hopeless it might get, everything is going to be okay in the end, and there's going to be, it's a bittersweet tale at some point. Middle Earth is a bittersweet place to exist in, but that is something I think that I think if it all wraps up very well at the end, and if I don't think would have the same impact, and I think it has that realism of people changed from a situation that is essential to humanity. And I think that's something that Tolkien just captured just better than anyone I can think of in fantasy and literature as a whole.
I just want to add that, in my experience in the discussions that I've had with my friends, I, grew up in a family and mostly a lot of friendships where we didn't have like any kind of religious upbringing, we're not regular churchgoers, etc. And the Tolkien's work actually kind of gave me and some of my friends who had a similar upbringing kind of a moral compass that we didn't, wasn't provided to us through a formal religious education. And I think, Dave, your point about the hopefulness of it is kind of where that comes from. It's kind of a code of behavior that says that you should be doing the right thing no matter how bad things get, because it will, in the end, it will be all right. And, in the Silmarillion, in the end, it will be all right, may not be in your lifetime. It might be in your children's or your grandchildren's or your great-grandchildren's lifetimes, but it will be that sort of arc of progress will go to a place where, people can live their lives in relative freedom and happiness, et cetera, and there will be something will improve down the road. You will not end up in like this horrible perdition where Morgoth rules the world and everyone is a slave. So I think that and that future is worth fighting for. And I think that kind of message really resonated with me personally, and I would like it to resonate more with society in general. So that's one of the reasons why I think it's been a really valuable text and collection of work for me and for a lot of the people that I know. And I also grew up with people who were not fantasy fans. Like for many years of my life, I was the only fantasy fan that I knew. And it's kind of like, and I also, grew up in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and especially as a woman, you're not supposed to admit that you liked fantasy. It was like not a girl thing. It wasn't supposed to be for girls. And it was, and so it was always like a pleasure to me to discover like that there were people who really loved it. And I think when the Jackson films came out, it kind of like opened the door for you to come out of the Tolkien closet and admit that you really loved these things. And it was amazing to me how that sort of like really just that just blossomed. So
I just highlight a couple of the comments that people have made in our webinar chat, because I love seeing what people are adding there. And Constance has said, the language creates beauty you can feel in the center of your soul. And I think that the spirituality that we're touching on and the beauty that we're talking about, so those two things kind of go hand in hand and they're intertwined. And obviously Tolkien creates beauty in his writing in many ways, and with his art, and with the maps, the language, etc. But I think his own spirituality is such a core part of this beauty that he sees in the world, the metaphor of beauty in the world and the literal beauty in the world. And it's all part of that hopefulness in spite of bleakness. It's the king wearing a crown again. It's the star way up in the heavens when the clouds part for a moment, that Tolkien clings onto himself, which, I'm sure is his generation trying to come back from the horrors of the Great War. Yeah. That was the one thing to try and cling on to, some kind of hopefulness, some kind of beauty in darkness. And so that spirituality and that beauty, those two things that really lift Tolkien's writing a bit higher than some other wonderful fantasy, wonderful world building, very entertaining books. They just perhaps give it that extra something.
Yeah, it speaks to the kind of story, we've all talked about the importance of story, and Tolkien was pretty famous for saying he wasn't trying to do anything allegorical. He was just trying to write a good story. But it is like you said, it's a fantasy story or a fairy story. And so if you read Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, you can see many of the themes that we're talking about. So, and he talks about 4 themes. One, subcreation. And so the map point, or I love Willie's point about all the parts that we don't see. I remember reading The Hobbit the first time and saying, I wonder where Gandalf went off to. Ah, he's back. Wonder what he did over there. And so, and you see that over and over again. You know, what's Arendelle doing at this point in time?
What happened to the fox?
Yeah, so that idea of subcreation and the encouragement, the talking fox, the encouragement to engage as sub-creators in the same kind of a world is something that is unique to that kind of fairy story element. It's an invitation to explore and make. The second thing he talks about is escape, which is the criticism for many of that fantasy genre that, like you were talking about, because and Tolkien was explicit. He's not talking about escapism. He's talking about escape from the kinds of prisons that we get into in this world, hopelessness as an example. And so as we step into this world, we are offered a path out into something bigger, something more. It goes to the spiritual elements that you were talking about. Third, he talks about consolation, that we can find a deep sense of hopefulness or satisfaction or purpose, even in the face of something as sober as mortality, which is a big theme. And so how do we engage in those kinds of things with a sense of peace, with a sense of purpose? And that's what fantasy is doing. And then finally, it's the happy ending or the eucatastrophe, the idea that the eagles are coming, or that things will turn out. It is present in virtually every story that we love, every movie that we've seen. James Bond is about to get cut in half. And all of a sudden, because Blofeld is busy doing exposition, he figures out a way out miraculously. And that idea of that sudden turn in the face of impossible odds is something that we resonate with deeply and that we want, because we face those same kinds of things. And so those are the sorts of stories that fantasy generally can give us, and why the father of modern fantasy still is so compelling in the groundwork that he has done for that kind of story for us.
Yeah, I love the fact that you can't Superman your way out of most of the things that happen in the Lord of the Rings. Yeah. You're not gonna get your typical hero, Prince Charming, that comes and saves the day. He's gonna try to save the day, but he's more than likely going to fail, and he's gonna have to lean on his friend. There's gonna have to be some kind of bond of fellowship that saves him, or something that he wasn't anticipating or looking forward to, and somebody along the way that there's some kind of thread of connection and faith and all those things are what inevitably at the end is what saves everyone. Whether it was, in The Hobbit, where they were beaten, and, after they left the Misty Mountains, they were going to die in those trees. But one act of kindness from Gandalf, mending Gwahir's wing, and then Gwahir's like, yo, let's go get him. Boom. Now we got him. Frodo, everybody's looking at him. He's a hero. He didn't throw the ring into the fire. He failed in that aspect, but his friends, keeping his faith, and he getting there, and him keeping the faith of what Gandalf said and remembering about, hey, your pity, Bilbo's pity might rule the fate of men. Boom. Now Gollum got the job done for him, because he actually was, pity. He felt pity for Gollum and befriended him in a way, and all those things are just woven without there. So you're not like, oh, somebody's going to come just ride up and do. Nothing happens as simple as that. And that is such a break from, so many stories and mythologies that we see, that is so refreshing and inspiring. So that there in itself, and we see that time and time again, whether it's in Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, or the Silmarillion, or any of his stories. It's not just some one person, like, Fingolfin, he tried to run up on Morgoth, and he did a great effort, but he still dies. And, Gondolin falls, and all these things happen. And then, now we're like, on behalf of these two kinships, let me go and speak to the Valar and see if they can help. And the Vanyar don't do anything, but you know what? We're going to come over and help this time. You never hear anything about the Vanyar from the beginning of Silmarillion all the way into the War of Wrath, but they don't break faith with the other elves. At the end, they come and help because of Earendil's finally coming and asking for help, and then they come along and help, and then the Teleri even give their ships, even though they were slighted and they were very upset with the Noldor, they still ferry them over to Middle Earth. So all of these bonds of fellowship, they come back into play, and then that is eventually what heals the hurts of the world. So I think that's very awesome, and I really like that, as opposed to, I'm a superhero, I'm going to come and just solve everything with my sword, with one swing of my sword. It's not like that. So that's really inspiring, and it leads to some good fiction going forward to anybody who's inspired by Tolkien.
I think that's a great point.
Yeah, the eucatastrophe, as Jim was saying, it's earned by the characters. It's not something that just happens. It's a long series of decisions and acts of kindness and acts of self-sacrifice that get to that point. And it, obviously within Tolkien's tapestry, it's all part of Eru Ilúvatar's will, essentially, as well. But it's earned at the same time. It's like, if they'd chosen a different path at certain times, or if they'd treated someone in a different way in a certain, or fallen to temptation, it may have been different. And I think I think one of the most important stories in all of Tolkien's work, which is like a counterpoint and sort of illustrates how this eucatastrophe has to be earned, is the Children of Hurin, but in particular Turin's character, about how he does give in to hopelessness, and he's still capable of so many good things. He is capable of those things. He's a very extraordinary person in a lot of ways. He's and he's had a very, very obviously hard life, and there's the curse of Morgoth hanging over him. But is the curse of Morgoth a self-fulfilling prophecy? Is it those choices that he is making? Is he giving into despair that is leading to this darker and darker and darker path? And there's a lot of parts in that story where, Beleg Strongbow is asking him, is begging him to turn away from what he's doing, and come back to love and come back to his found family, essentially, and come back to the light, and he refuses. He's mired in this despair. And he's still an enemy of the shadow. He's still doing what he thinks he needs to do, but it's not in the way that Tolkien would approve of, and he doesn't earn that eucatastrophe ending. Like it becomes as close to grimdark as possible in Tolkien's writing. It's a very, very harrowing kind of story, and a very sad ending and to his tale. And it's a great.
Dave, I would just interject that I think the Children of Hurin is grimdark. It's not close to it. It's there.
I was going to say that too. I was like, that is super grim.
It is. Yeah. I think it's a great counterpoint to everything else, because I think you could put Turin against a lot of the characters that we know so well and say, well, these people chose friendship, they chose hope, they chose this. He didn't. And if that is it because of the curse of Morgoth, or is it because of his own actions, or is it because he just turned away he couldn't see the light anymore? And I think it's just it's a beautiful story as well. It's so well written, and it's fantastic. And but I think it's so really important. Those people that kind of like, Tolkien's all elves and this and this and this and what have you. And it's like, well, maybe just read the Children of Hurin.
Yeah. It's a lot deeper than pointy ears, and I think you're really speaking around another one of those themes that makes Tolkien appealing to the generations. It's very relatable. I think Kirsten mentioned this earlier too. These are stories of struggle. They're stories of tragedy, and sometimes they're stories of triumph. But it's so human to go through misery and struggle. And have despair, and be tempted by things that seem like an easy solution or a temporary fix. But that's one of those things I think that also keeps the appeal. People can really relate to what's happening with those characters, and there's such a depth.
Yeah.
And have that talent to make character-driven storytelling.
Laura said that in the chat comments here in the webinar that Tolkien's truths cross the human experience, and I think that's true, that they are deep truths that we can all see and identify and recognize and say, oh yeah, me too, you know. Willie's point before about how it's not one superhero gesture, but it takes a community. You know, fellowship is such a key thing. It's not by chance that that's one of the key titles. And I think, to me, that ties into the fact that as much as I love reading Tolkien and I love watching the movies and all of that, I wouldn't keep coming back to it as much as I do were it not for the fellowship around Tolkien's work. So, and I maybe one of the reasons why Tolkien fandom so lends itself to fellowship is because Tolkien's writing is so much about fellowship and your need for comrades, your need for people who will walk with you, even if they don't think they're going to be able to walk back at the end of it, they will walk with you nonetheless. Into the very fires, you know. And so for me, this is sort of straying a little bit away from Tolkien's work, but I keep coming back because I have found such a network and such a community within this fandom. And, you know, Peter Jackson's movies, of course, had a large role to play in bringing that to the fore, in, as Amanda said before, enabling you to sort of come out of the closet and go, yeah, I'm a Tolkien fan. But it is a rich gift and something that I hope that we continue, that I think we're doing very well in continuing with, in spite of some of the divisions that came up in the run-up to and through Rings of Power's first season. Tolkien fans are excellent and admirable people, and it's been, so Tolkien has been a rich part of my life, not just because of his work, but because of the other people who love his work. So I wanted to just mention that as a big reason that I keep coming back.
Well, speaking of the Rings of Power and some of the divisions, I do want to address the elephant in the room.
Olifant in the room.
I want to talk about elves with short hair. Is that something that should be allowed?
Look, I want more bald elves, to be honest with you. That's
That's what I'm talking about.
Look, I have the point. They're in the YouTube comments. We played the One Ring tabletop game on a Friday night, and my lore master is in the YouTube comments. I am an elf. I am a bald elf with a beard. I think, you know, short hair, long hair. I don't mind. It's one of those things. They're at a time of peace, and they're all like, let's try something new. We've had long hair for thousands of years. Let's get our 80s kind of Duran Duran styling on and just let's go for it.
Well, you know, it brings up an array of things, part of which goes back to what Kirsten said. There is a tremendous diversity, cultural diversity, geographic diversity, political perspective diversity, that still Tolkien stories attract into it. So the bald elves, I mean, I got friends who are really upset about the idea of pointy-eared elves. Or if you go to Rings of Power, you know, elves of color. You know, but there is an aspect of Tolkien which invites ownership and association and personal resonance. So, you know, maybe we'll have a green elf somewhere in there. You know, there is an aspect of the universality of this story which is important, and it runs up against, you know, no. If we're going to just, you know, wander outside of the Nordic, Northern Germanic tradition, then you're going outside the pale. I don't think that's the story that Tolkien. I think he meant to write a universal story. He was certainly
100%. And I get a real kick out of the passion behind the argument, because if you care so much about the length of the hair of an elf, you're coming from someplace special. In my mind, it might be a little misguided, but it's that sense of this is how deeply I'm invested, and how, how personal Tolkien's work is, that I'm going to have this fight and I'm going to care about the length of hair. Because he really didn't say it had to be this or it had to be that. You could probably split a finer argument over Balrog wings. So it's in those gray areas, in those mysteries that Willie was saying, we have such intrigue, and but the passion of the debate really hits me, and I think it's pretty humorous.
Yeah,
I
this is
think, though, oh, sorry, Willie, go ahead.
Oh no, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things that bothers me slightly, as much as I love Peter Jackson's vision, is that the fandom in some areas has become a little bit Peter Jackson's way is the only way. And there are things that people have argued about that are not Tolkien, they're PJ. And so I kind of wish that we had seen Del Toro's Hobbit, because in a way I was thrilled to go back to Peter Jackson's vision of Middle-earth for the Hobbit trilogy. But we wouldn't be so cemented into PJ's vision if we'd seen someone else's Hobbit, and the little tiny insights, like tiny glimmers from people who worked on designs for Del Toro's Hobbit, having talked to some artists who've maybe even let me see a couple of sketches and things, and you're like, wow, that would have been so interesting to see. I don't know if I would have loved it. I love Del Toro's aesthetic. I don't know if it's right for Middle-earth. And I did have a very interesting conversation last year, well, Jim was there as well, with John Howe, where he was sort of saying, because he was part of the team when Del Toro was on board, and he more or less said, I'm not sure that Del Toro's vision was really Tolkien's Middle-earth, but it was still cool. And, this is the thing that I think we've got a little bit trapped in some train tracks of saying, oh, this is the way that we should see Middle-earth on the screen. And as much as I love PJ's vision, hey, we've been talking about how there's room for so much sub-creation. So long-haired elves, short-haired elves, I just want to see elves in all kinds of arrays of ways so that we can say it doesn't have to be Orlando Bloom looking hot as Legolas. There are other alternatives. Other elves are available.
Yeah, I'm with you on that note about the kind of different takes on it. I mean, the Gollum game that came out recently, you can enjoy the game or not, but what I thought was interesting about it was that it's a game made by an Eastern European studio, and it had a very Eastern European feel to it, and it was a different art style to what we're used to. It was a different approach to designs on characters, designs on elves, designs on the world, and even with a lot of the background actors that they were using, they were speaking Elvish in a Slavic accent, which I thought was refreshing. It was great to hear, because it is one of those things with the movies and with Alan Lee and John Howe's artwork being so prevalent for many, many years, that you do think of that as how Middle-earth looks, but it doesn't have to look that way. I mean, it's been the work of the breadth of Tolkien's work is around 11,500 years, probably even longer. It's a long time. Like, things are going to change and look different, so it's always refreshing to see that different take on something. And as Sukish was saying, there is always this debate. Like, I'm one of these people that think Legolas should have had black hair, and when I first saw Orlando Bloom, I was like, hang on a second, he's not got blonde hair, he shouldn't have. But that is just the way now. It's it's what these people think of, and that's fine. It's all good. I like to see different takes on it, because I have how it looks in my head when I think about it and how I read it.
And that's the point, how it looks in your head. It would be interesting to kind of go around and say, what were your first visual images from outside that started playing with whatever is in your head? So if you're like me and you grew up with the Hildebrandt brothers calendars, or actually if you're like me and your first version of The Hobbit were the Barbara Remington covers, and you said, I wonder when I'm going to see an emu in here somewhere. And they're just wild 60s, early 70s kinds of representations. But I still have an affection for that, even though they're ridiculous compared to, what the actual descriptions in the book are. But there are these images which I'm contributing and which others are contributing. And that's where we get into some of these tensions, because not everybody's version or vision, like Guillermo del Toro's, is going to be the same as mine. And can I get through that and sort of celebrate your vision?
Yeah.
Or do I have to have it my way as part of that? How do I keep, and that's part of the fun, is the fellowship part, coming back and saying, tell me what you think. And then I'll tell you what I think.
Willie, you wanted to make a point earlier.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and just say, I have a unique perspective here, being someone of color that had to go through that whole period, unfortunately, where there was a lot of backlash. There were elves of color there, and it goes along with the elves with short hair, anything that somebody doesn't like. So I had to navigate it, and it was a weird time, but it was also very telling. There were different parts of it. So at first you're thinking everybody's racist, which isn't the case. Some people genuinely are like, hey, this is how I feel these characters look. Why are you changing it? And they're genuinely just like, hey, I'm just a stickler for this. Then, unfortunately, there are people who just hate mongering. They're using it as a jumping off point to just, hate farm and say, hey, no black people in this, or no Asian people in this, or no, whatever the case may have you, people in this, we want it to remain whatever we think it is. So you got to separate those things. You kind of got to drown out the noise, drown out the bull crap, and just, I can have a conversation with somebody who says, hey, I really think elves should just have long hair. It's no hate or anything like that. So I don't like this version. And then we can have simple conversations and say, hey, listen, they live thousands of years long. You think they never got a haircut? And then we can get a laugh out of it, as opposed to, you're racist, I'm not, blah, 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 all that type of stuff. We could get a laugh out of it. We can point out, and what I typically do is, and I try to be as nice as I can, just like Kirsten said, which she snatched the words right out of my mouth. Damn you, Kirsten. She literally said, everybody's just used to Peter Jackson's vision. It's his vision. Like literally everything he did, they think is the model of what an elf should be, or what a dwarf should be, or what it's his vision. And we gotta separate that. It's hard to get a megaphone and announce that to the world and have everyone hear it. But that's really the truth of what's going on. Because if we read the books and we're sticklers, a lot of everybody's in vision, like the Hilda, it's literally, they were drawing Conan-esque heroes with like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, it looks nothing like anything. Like, if we're going by the color of the Teleri hair, usually it's not blonde. So why is Legolas, and why is, like, we can nitpick it to death. I did a funny thing, and I think it was the most healthy thing that I could possibly do when I was getting a lot of white noise and stuff. Somebody was talking about the color of the elves, and I literally just put the Rankin and Bass Thranduil up. And I said, so where's the problem with this? And they can't fight that kind of, so calm down, because you're just screaming into space here. Like, you're not making any sense. Where's the backlash? Because he is greenish gray, and he's not even, where's the problem? So are you just racist, or are you really have a problem? This is an adaptation of what they thought Thranduil, he's a wood elf. That's what they did. Nobody really had a problem with it too crazy. And nobody's like, well, Elrond's an elf and he looks like a human with the halo over his head. Where's the do you really feel that way? No, settle down. So I think we just need to take a deep breath, drown out the foolishness, you know what I'm saying, and have conversations with people and try to keep it lighthearted and try to be accepting of everybody's opinions. Which, as long as they're not hate, I can have conversation with somebody about stuff we don't agree on, and it drives us forward into being like, okay, you have that opinion about that. I can agree to disagree, and let's see where they go with this. Let's see where they go with that. And that's also what keeps us coming back, right? We go into a circle. It keeps us coming back. Do Balrogs have wings? Like, in my thought process, I'm like, well, it says like wings, and then it says the wings, and shadow can be a shape of anything. They're made of shadow. So yeah, I feel like they had wings. But then another interpretation is completely acceptable. It says like, that's not a definite, and I'm like, but I get what you're saying. Completely fine with me. Let's see what they draw. Does it look cooler with wings? Of course it looks cooler. Let's be real. But it's the conversation. We can have that conversation forever. It keeps everybody coming back as long as it's healthy, as long as we're not hate mongering. Let's just keep it going and look forward to the next adaptation and see what they do, compare and contrast, and we'll just keep getting different versions, and more is better.
When I was about 7, I drew a big picture that I still have somewhere of the Battle of the Five Armies. I've got this big sort of, multiple big pages, and it's quite
ambitious.
It's quite interesting thinking about, when Jim was saying before, what your visual influences. I definitely was influenced by the Rankin Bass Hobbit. And at that point, I don't think I'd actually seen the movie, but my brother had an LP with the read along sort of book. So I'd seen the images. So for the Hobbits, I was definitely influenced by that. But the elves that I drew were influenced by Tolkien's elves that he drew in the Father Christmas letters.
Right.
Because I was obsessed with the Father Christmas letters when I was little. And sidebar, I wrote to Father Christmas to ask him to write back to me. And I think it might have been my dad. Not that I'm saying that there isn't a Father Christmas, but I don't think the real Father Christmas wrote to me. But I got this wonderful letter on Christmas morning one year that had been written to me by Father Christmas. Anyway, the little elves that he drew in those letters, my elves in my Battle of the Five Armies, definitely look like those elves. So that was definitely, and my eagles look like seagulls. So it was definitely, the seagulls are coming in my version.
It's funny because, what's in Jim's head as like foundational imagery, I can't stand. No offense to the brothers Hildebrandt, but I was just so turned off by that artwork. And, we're all kind of victims of the success of the Lord of the Rings films because this has happened. And I have witnessed debates where people argue that, Arwen was at Helm's Deep. And these things that never actually took place in the actual literature are fact. Because of one person's interpretation of the work. And, for anybody who's so stuck in a singular vision, I encourage you to do a little searching on the internet and just look for book covers around the world, because Hobbit and certainly Lord of the Rings has been translated into, I don't know, as many languages as the Bible, I believe. If not, then almost. And so you can find, and decades old too. So go look at Soviet era interpretive art of Lord of the Rings and other kinds of things. There's so much out there. There's some very scary golems, for example, and
weird
some
golems.
weird golems and some Bilbos you'd think just kind of rolled out of the back of a train somewhere. Diversity is what it's all about. And it also harkens back to that theme of community, because it took all those different races, all those cultures, and even subcultures of Hobbit, for example, to get the job done.
Mm-hmm.
So we're all saying bald elves, yes, for Rings of Power season 2. We're all on the same page.
Maybe Kieran, maybe.
From the comments, I just want to point out one. Shane McInnes writes that Tolkien himself is unlikely to have cared about casting non-European actors in some of these roles. And I think that's an important point too. And one of the things that Tolkien's text is all about, one, the fellowship that Willie was talking about earlier, but also the dangers of pridefulness. And I think that being so adamant that, elves have to look like this and hobbits have to look like that is one of those areas where maybe we need to step back and take the pride down a notch a little bit, because there are, it's just the that's the level of pride where you're not willing to listen to anybody or any criticism or take advice from anybody or suggestions just leads to terrible things like the War of the Wraths.
Right.
So it's I think that those are important things for people to think about.
Yeah, I think Tolkien would have been less concerned with what Aragorn looked like. So if we talk about like the Bashki version of what he looked like, or the Magic the Gathering version of what he looks like, the new cards that have just come out, he would have been less concerned about how he looks, but he would have been more concerned with Jackson's interpretation of his character and his arc, which I think he would have been well against. I think it works for a movie, but I think he would have been very deeply upset by that, I think, because Aragorn was the culmination of the end of Isildur's bloodline, and this was his time, and that's what he was there for. I don't think he would have cared what he looked like, really, as long as the name was correct, his genealogy was correct, and his arc was as he saw it. So it's just, I think that's my opinion on it anyway.
See, and for me, that gets to the one of those deeper human points. I think that the reason that The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings got popular is because Tolkien introduced hobbits. That's why the Silmarillion didn't get published until the 70s.
Right.
And the reason that the hobbits were so popular was because in them we could see ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So, literally at the Council of Elrond says, the quest may be attempted by the weak with as much hope as the strong. Yet such is oft the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do them because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere. And so in that idea, we see that any of us, me, can be significant. And so the hobbits tell us, welcome into this story. Whoever you are, however weak you are, however marginalized you feel, however, off in the deep corners of the outback of the world, you can be significant. And so that is an invitation for every single person who reads this to incorporate that same thinking. You can be significant. And if that is true, then anyone, anywhere in the world, of whatever ethnicity, of whatever education level, you can be a hobbit. You can have these kinds of virtues and you can make a difference. And that is fundamentally attractive. I want to be part of that world because I want to be significant. I want to make a difference. And so if I want to see people like me in this world, who am I to say, nah, that's not my world, you can't come in? That's ridiculous. It's not Tolkien. So, and that's what draws us in, those humble hobbits.
There's so many themes throughout the whole story, and really good themes. There's themes of, the dangers of misinformation and judging people in the Lord of the Rings. Like literally the Easterlings and the Dunlendings literally learn, hey, I thought you were going to kill us. I thought this whole time I hated you because they said you were going to burn us at the stake or kill us or eat us or.
Willie, we lost you. Your audio for a sec. But I think that's a great point. And it's sort of like that misinformation that gets fed by, Sauron and Morgoth before him. It's like sort of the fomenting of lies to, so that they can pursue their own agenda was a big part of their thing. So, I want to move on and just take, first of all, remind our webinar attendees that you're welcome to put some questions into the chat, into the Q&A function for us. But also, meanwhile, I'd like to kind of go around and have each of you talk about, your favorites and favorite thing that exists now of the Tolkien universe and favorite thing that you're looking forward to. So, Willie, how about you go first?
So my favorite thing that exists now, are we talking media or just in?
Doesn't matter. Your choice. Your favorite thing.
My favorite thing everyone knows this about me are the villains. The villains really do it for me, especially Sauron and the Witch King. I think they're really intricate, and people are always like, well, how do you like the bad guy? their reasoning, their methodology, it's just not, I just hate the world. It's much more complex than that. They approach things very different. This is why I like Sauron as opposed to Morgoth, because Sauron is so methodical. He's so, very smart. Very, he just does things very different from many other villains. And then he can still deliver those super hideous villainous qualities of just brute force. Okay, that's not working. I'm just going to try to brute force it then. Oh, that brute force is not working then? Here, take me. Oh, that's not working. Hey, check this out. Hey, guy, this person said this about you. Hey, they don't even really believe in you. Now, it's so many ways that he can get you. I just admire that, and I think it's really cool, and it makes for a great villain. And I just love that part about it. Not that I love the villainy of him, what he's doing. Now, in the media and going forward, like, what do I want to see? The main thing I would want to see, being that the rights have now, they've announced some movies coming out, and everybody's like, what are they going to do? Are they going to redo Lord of the Rings? Are they going to do the War in the North? I want to see the war between Angmar and Arnor. I think that is where the franchise should go. It's my personal opinion. I think we need to know what happened in the North. Of course, anybody who's taking my class is like, of course he's talking about Arnor, where the hobbits live is Arnor. It's the Lost Realm is no longer there. When you go through the Hobbit book, what is these lone lands in the background? What is this broken tower here? What is this? Why is Aragorn and the Rangers just dissembled people that are just roaming the wild? Like, what is all of this? They don't explain it. They leave it open, and it's awesome. And they explain it in little bits and pieces, and you never get the full scope unless you encompass the entire writings together. And you learn so much of how important the Witch King is, and how far back Sauron was setting up things even when he wasn't fully back yet, when he was just, gathering things, and how far-reaching his things were, and how it all culminates with the destruction of Arnor, and eventually it goes to Gondor, but he weakens the North to a point where it's no longer any help, and they think the bloodline is broken, and all these wonderful things, and the Witch King even getting driven off leads to Aenor getting taken, and now there's no king in Gondor. All these things are literally connected, and I think that is where we should focus. It's something new, something people don't know. There's interconflicts, there's a civil war, there's it's so much. There's prophecies. There's so much there. There's friendship between Elendil and Gil-galad, the elves of Lindon, and the faithful that still remain in the north. There's so much there. There's hopelessness. Like, are they coming? Are they coming? Are they going to help us? Oh my God, our capital of Illuminus fell. Now we are at Fornor. Fornor gets taken. There's so much there. Like, it's literally amazing. And then we got great villains, of course. The Witch King does so much. He's sending fell spirits to Cardolan. He's doing so many things. He takes the men of Rudauer who weren't fully invested in Arnor as the men of Arthedain and Cardolan. So it's so much. I'm going to just talk about it forever. I think that's where we should go. That's what I'm waiting to see, the war between Angmar and Arnor. So that's what I want.
You heard it here, folks. Okay, awesome. Dave, how about you? Do you have a...
that was what I was going to say as well. So I'll think about something else in the background, because I think the War of the North is I'd love to see an adaptation of it. I think it's so rich, and I think the Witch King is one of the best villains in all Tolkien's work as well. I think he's you got a real rise and fall of him, and what he was before as well. So it's very intriguing. My favorite aspect of Tolkien. I think it's first stage stuff. Like, I love Lord of the Rings, I love The Hobbit and everything, but there's just something just so just the mythic aspect of everything from creation up to the War of Wrath is just there's nothing else like it, really. It's so involved, and it's like, as a fantasy writer, you do kind of think about this world building aspect of it, but like, Tolkien went back and literally created an entire history of people, of vast amounts of people, and had a creation story of, like, people might create, well, this is where this culture came from. Tolkien went way back before that and was like, look, this is how this god created all of these things, by his thought, and this is how they sang this into life. And you know, there's so many mysteries that come from that that'll sadly never, well, not even sadly, will never be answered. And that's great because it sparks so much debate and so much growth around Tolkien constantly, where people are bringing their ideas into this. And I just love the I love the whole concept of diminishing into the West and diminishing in general. And you start off with Middle Earth. It was never at its finest after it was created. That was its, even before it was created, when it was thought of, I guess. And every single moment from then, it was diminishing in some kind of way. And I just think that's a really beautiful aspect to it. It's a sad aspect, but it's got this beauty to it. And I just love this, so you start on this point and it's this gradual decline, but it's people striving against it. And I think the first age is the thing that really there's so much fire and fury to it. And you know, there's literal characters that have so much fire and fury inside them that their bodies turn to cinder when they die, because they're just so, that's just the power of life that they have. And I think it's just such a heady concept, and it's just so rich. And I love just thinking about it. When I'm having a tough day, I'll just go and think about if Fëanor was actually a bad person or not, and if he was misunderstood or whatever. And I have a little debate with myself in my head while everything else is going on in the world. And I'm like, well, you're thinking about this, but I'm thinking about Fëanor and his sons. And what did Celebrimbor think about Fëanor? All this kind of stuff. These are the things that I like to think about. And what I'm looking forward to most, you know, I enjoyed Rings of Power. I think it had, there were some really, really strong aspects to it, some really strong storylines. It suffered in the same way, I think, in some other parts of it that the last couple of seasons of Game of Thrones did, where there was kind of like, this is what has to happen for the story, so we have to just get there and do it. And broken the world a little bit and the storytelling. But I really enjoyed Charlie Vickers as Halbrand / whoever he actually ended up being. I don't want to do any spoil. I think it might be too soon for spoilers. And I'd really like to see what he does with that character going forward. But my favorite aspect of Ring of Power was Rob Iamaro's portrayal of Elrond, which I thought, I just really loved him as Elrond. I liked Hugo Weaving as Elrond, but I don't think he quite had that. It was a little bit too strict for me and a little bit too severe. And
I was talking about that.
Yeah, the thing that I really liked about Ring of Power's Elrond was that I'm sure you're all familiar with Monty Python with Michael Palin. So Michael Palin, after Monty Python, he spent most of his time doing travel documentaries for the BBC. And he just goes off to these places and he's just happy to be there. And he's walking around being all charming to people. And it's like, he was like, I'm going to be Michael Palin as Elrond. And I loved it. And I can't wait to see more of him. I think he's a wonderful actor. And I just think he really kind of, Elrond is one of my favorite characters in all of the Legendarium. I think and that scene in sorry, I'm going on a lot of this is what I mean. I'm really sorry about this one. the scene in Rings of Power where he's talking to Durin about the expectation of Durin's father, and then he does that lovely thing where it's like, literally, when I look up into the sky, I see my father. He's a star in the sky, and he like saved everyone. And it was a line that might not have worked. It was they really reached for it. But the way that he did it so earnestly and so believably, that just to kind of say, look, we all have expectations that we try to live up to, and my father is literally a star in the sky that saved everyone in Middle Earth. And he was brilliant. I loved him. I can't wait to see more of him as that character, because as we know from Elrond's his history, he's got a really rich storyline coming up from in the second age of Middle Earth.
Kirsten, how about you?
Well, in terms of Tolkien's writing, my favorite is still the Father Christmas letters, because I love Christmas. But I'm going to be really on brand and say my favorite thing in all of Tolkiendom is the OneRing.net, because I love everything that it has brought into my life. It's just been extraordinary. And so what I'm looking forward to most is more of that. I'm really looking forward to the War of the Rohirrim animated movie next year. Can't wait to see what they do with that. I'm looking forward to seeing where Rings of Power goes, even more now that I've heard David's thoughts. I'm looking forward to Willie's idea being brought to the screen. All of this, all of it, because as far as I'm concerned, all it means is that we keep having opportunities to get together, to do panels, to go to conventions, to host events, to hang out with wonderful people from all the corners of the world. And I just can't get enough of it. So yeah, it's what I love is what the fandom and therefore what the professor's work has brought into my life, and what I look forward to is more of that. Look, I've just made some new friends even just tonight. So bring on more of it. That's what I say.
That was awesome.
Tukish, how about you?
That was so nice. I'm just going to say period.
All right, Jim, how about yourself? How about you?
The thing that I like, I mean, thematically, is that Tolkien has figured out how to take the contrast, like Willie started us with, in terms of, you know, Angmar and the Witch King and Sauron and so on. Tolkien is one of the most effective authors at making the good both beautiful and strong. And you can go back to First Age and even pre-First Age stuff. So if you go to Tirion on Tuna and Valinor, or you go to Gondolin, or you go to Rivendell or Lorien or Minas Tirith, or even the Shire, you know, you've got all of these places of strength and refuge and beauty and restoration and hope and reconciliation that are there, all with that same sort of threat of decay that's real, and Tolkien is realistic about it. But there is something hopeful when you go to Rivendell as the last homely house, and you know, I'm safe here. And so that kind of safety and that kind of beauty in combination, and the strength of all those places, for me is one of the most attractive elements of Tolkien. And then that crosses over for me into characters. And as anyone who, you know, look at my One Ring name is going to know, my favorite character is going to be Sam, because I think he has the most humble and compelling arc. You know, he goes from, you know, just a rustic gardener to, you know, Samwise the Brave and the hero.
The true hero of the trilogy.
Which is kind of a reference that Tolkien makes in one of his letters. And so for me, those kinds of characters, and there are lots of great heroes that I love in Tolkien, but for me, Sam really exemplifies the everyman hero in it. And so where do I want to go? I love these ideas that are floating around. I'm on the bus with all of you guys. And I don't know if it's possible, but I'd love to spend more time in the Old Forest with Bombadil and Goldberry and find out some of their story. So that would be fun for me to explore. I don't know how to do it.
I want to piggyback on that, because that was definitely something I'm interested in seeing. And I would really love to see more about the forests all the way around, and really want to know the story of the Ents. What was their, you know, coming to awareness like at the hand of the elves, and what happened to the Entwives, and, you know, how are Entlings raised up in the world? Love to see that. What I don't want to see, and I think we're probably going to, is a whole bunch of junk to make money. Embracer has purchased a lot of rights to creative outlets for the Tolkien universe. And yeah, I'd love to see a whole miniseries maybe about the Ents, but I don't want to find, you know, trash in the park that has come from merchandising. You know, what great irony to have Tolkien trash polluting the world. So I'm afraid of that. I'm just afraid of the abuse that will probably happen in order to make money, not to bring things down, but.
Well, we have a comment. How about the real Entwives of Fanghorn Forest?
Let's go.
Spoiler alert.
That's my type of reality show right there.
Yeah.
How did they get that audio?
Guys, I have to step out a little bit early. So I apologize for my absence from this point. I just have to go take care of something that's unavoidable. But it's been an honor and a pleasure being on this panel with you guys. Thank you for listening to my voice and allowing me to be a Tolkien nerd with you guys. And I really appreciate the invite. You are all wonderful, and you have wonderful, thoughts and everything about you guys. Just it makes me feel like I found some true friends, and I hope we get to do this again. And thanks for the fellowship, guys. So I will talk to you all very soon, and kill the end of the panel for me. All right, guys.
All right.
Here, Willie.
Thank you so much, Willie.
All right, thank
All right.
you. It's good seeing all of you. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Thanks. I guess, I think that kind of wraps it up. So I think we might as well just, say goodbye. But before we do, I have some housekeeping notes. So thank you to everybody from theonering.net for all of your incredible insights. It was amazing. I always feel like my favorite thing in the world, besides Tolkien, is sitting around with people who know more than I do and listening to them. So thank you for that opportunity, for coming on board and for agreeing to do this panel with us. And it's been truly awesome. And I'm just thrilled with how it all turned out. So I do have some things to suggest that everybody go to glasgow2024.org and check out upcoming events, panels, volunteer if you wish. You can email volunteers@glasgow2024.org if you wish to join us in helping to plan the conference that's happening in August of 2024. You can visit, if you want some merch, you can go to redbubble.com/people/Glasgow2024/shop. And we have some fan tables at some live cons coming up. There's at Eurocon Conflict, the 8th to 11th of June, and that's today, I guess, in Uppsala, Sweden. We will be at NASFIC Pemicon, the 20th to 23rd of July in Winnipeg, Canada. Hopefully it will not be on fire. Sorry, Canada. Sorry, Canada. FantasyCon, the 15th to 17th of September in Birmingham, England. And then more virtual panels coming up. We have Addiction and SFF on Thursday, July 20th at 7:30 p.m. British summertime. And we have an international fandom involving people from Finland and Poland on Wednesday, the 16th of August at 7 p.m. British summertime. So keep your eyes open for more announcements from Glasgow 2024 organizers. And if you enjoyed this, please visit our YouTube channel to see past panels, and have a great evening. So thank you again to all of our panelists.
Thanks for having us, WorldCon, and I hope that the One Ring can be involved with Glasgow 2024 some more. Party at my flat in Glasgow 2024.
Yeah.
The One Ring, will be at San Diego Comic Con next month. We'll be at Dragon Con, as we always are, and we'll be probably hosting a party and hopefully giving a panel at New York Comic Con as well. So look out for us there. But we're really thrilled to be involved at all with Glasgow 2024. So thanks so much for asking us, and hope we can collaborate some more.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks,
Good night.
Amanda.
Bye, everybody.
David, nice meeting you.
Demarie.
Maria.